head of innovation at AdSwerve, a leading consultancy specializing in the Google marketing platform. He is deeply experienced with Google Analytics, having trained numerous companies around the world. He was given the Award of Excellence for contributions to the Google Analytics partner community and is currently focusing on being a leading contributor to the new GA4 properties. And he is going to give us a live demo. There's, I'm sure, a lot of questions about this, but he's going to kind of cover, the state of where it is today, when should you get started, how to do it, and much more. And again, wrap up with some questions. So Charles, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, let's have some fun. So I'm going to share my screen. So today we're going to talk all about GA4. So I'm not going to share any slides. I'm just going to spend the entire time in the product so you can get hopefully a really good understanding of what it is, how to use it, and how to approach it. So I'm going to really focus, I think, on 3 key areas. First, I'm going to start with a brief intro of what GA4 is and how we got to where we are today, and a little bit about what's to come next. Then I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you really what is really exciting about GA4, why and how it's different from the existing version of Google Analytics many of us have used for 10 to 15 years, and how it's really changed and brought new capabilities and many features that many of us have been waiting for years. And then lastly, we have plenty of time for open Q&A, and I have full access to the product, and I'm hoping to answer as many questions as you have and you can bring. So as we go through, we'll probably save most of the questions till the end, but definitely feel free to chat those. So to just get straight to it, for a brief introduction, as was mentioned, my name's Charles. I've been working with Google Analytics for about 10 years. I have a very deep background in Google Analytics, especially on the enterprise or 360 side. And really for the last 2 years, I focused pretty much entirely on these new GA4 properties. So to start off with, where I like to start thinking about is Google Analytics has been around for about 15 years. And what I find really fascinating about it is you can actually still use the original tracking code, the urchin.js version, and Google Analytics will still successfully process data from that tracking library even today. And I share that just to show you how long the core of Google Analytics has really been the same. And I don't feel like there's a lot of other SaaS-based platforms that kind of have that longevity. So when we think about GA4, or Google Analytics 4, as we call it, the first place to really start is it's simply the first time ever that Google is rebuilding the entire platform. So it's a new backend, it's a new front end, it's a new UI, it's full of new capabilities and features. And really the reason behind all of this, the way I like to think of it, is many of us who have used Google Analytics for a long time have tons of things we wished that the platform could do better. We wish it could handle larger amounts of data. We wish it could do better things with funnels and pathing, or it had better integrations, or gave us better access to our data. And we could go on and on and on. GA4, in many ways, exists to solve a number of the long-term pain points that many of us have found or kind of had growing pains in that kind of free version that we've been using forever. So that's GA4. It's a completely new platform, and eventually it's going to be the version we all use. Today, it's still largely kind of early. You don't have to use it. In fact, the best recommendation that Google and many partners and kind of leaders in our industry have is it's actually best to try and use both versions of Google Analytics now. And the reason being, simply, GA4 does not yet have all of the features that Universal does, but Google's working on releasing all of that. But we're starting to get closer and closer to the point where all of the things you expect that you could do in Universal, you'll soon be able to do in GA4. So in my guess, probably like towards the end of the year or at some point next year, we're going to reach the place where we can really start having a conversation about using GA4 as your primary properties instead of just as a secondary property as we might do today. So at the end, I'm happy to answer questions, show you how easy it is to get started. because it's something you can do really in 5 to 10 minutes to just get some data into a GA4 property. But to start off for our conversation today, I want to get straight into the product. And really what I want to focus on is the exciting areas of how GA4 is new and different from Universal, and certain things that if you use Google Analytics today, you can just immediately do in GA4 that solve a number of different pain points. So to start off with, one of the things I like to talk about is Google Analytics 4 has a number of features that have previously only been available in Google Analytics 360 or the enterprise version. So as an example, the BigQuery integration, that was one of the main reasons people upgraded to that enterprise version of Google Analytics. That is now included for free in GA4, and I can show you that. But another kind of key area is this section over here called analysis. And if any of you have ever used Adobe, it's going to have a little bit of an Adobe Workbench type feel. But this is now a huge part of GA4. This is where you're going to be doing kind of all your freeform analysis and exploration. And in addition, there's a number of new features that we've been waiting for really since the very beginnings of Google Analytics. So as an example, one of the things you can't do in the existing version of Universal Analytics, or the version that's been around forever, is there's just no way to create any sort of meaningful funnels. And if you were to ask me to help you do any sort of path analysis or understand how users flow through your website, the pathing and funnel features in the existing version of GA are just honestly non-existent or terrible at best. So GA4 is the first time ever that you'll be able to actually create easy and meaningful funnels and do things like pathing analysis. So let me give you a few examples. So in analysis, we can simply go in here, and if we just have some data in our GA4 property, you can create a funnel on the fly. And the funnels are completely customizable, as well as flexible, and they're retroactive. So simply you go in and you can define whatever sort of funnel you want off of all your events, your dimensions, any of the pages you're creating. So here's an example of a funnel that's just kind of the default out of the box one. And what's interesting to me is to actually point out some things that are even better than the enterprise version of Google Analytics. So for some of my clients that are paying for the enterprise version, there are things you can do now for free in GA4 that are even better than what they had from a feature set. So I'll give you two examples. First, now that we can create funnels, we can start to do things that were never really possible in GA. And an example of that is around time. So one of my biggest pain points in the existing version of Google Analytics over here is that it does a pretty terrible job of helping you understand anything around time. It really only measures time per page or time per session or time per user. If you wanted to measure the time between actions or interactions, there's no good way to do that today. So as an example, how much time does it take when someone starts a form and completes a form? Or how long does it take when someone starts your checkout and completes your checkout? Any sort of interactions, GA just doesn't and can't really measure that in any easy way. So now, one of the biggest changes with GA4 is simply Google changed the data model. And it's adopted a new event-driven data model, which is very common in our industry with platforms like Snowplow, Heap, and many others. And that means that everything is tracked as an event. And the important part there is now we can do things and put together dimensions and metrics that was never really allowed previously. So one example is in our new funnel tool, there's a new feature called show elapsed time. And you can simply build any funnel you want and just check this elapsed time box. And on the fly, Google will calculate exactly how much time between any steps of your funnel it took your users to complete those steps. And I'm going to come back to time in a little bit and show you another way we can use time. But this is exciting. We can actually do meaningful analysis around time. In addition, they've actually rebuilt how time is measured. So previously, it only measured really time between pages. Now we get actual in-page time, so interaction time, and how much time was spent when your content or your app was in the foreground. It's not necessarily measuring background time like it did before. But another example of improvements that we can't even do in the enterprise version of GA is within these funnels, we can solve different sorts of analysis challenges. And one of those is every marketer wants funnels. But if I were to ask you to analyze a funnel over time, this is a terrible visualization to do that. It's a bar chart. So trying to figure out how this funnel changed over the past year is very challenging with this particular view. So another new feature is you can actually go into the funnel tool in GA4 and you can simply change the visualization, and you can actually request a trended funnel that's built on the exact same steps you have in your existing funnel. So now we can start to really build meaningful funnels, take this way further. And just like Google Analytics does today, everything is very interactive. So you can come in here, you can actually build audiences from users that left from a certain step of your funnel. You can create abandoned completion steps. You can do all sorts of things within these funnels to take this even further. And obviously, you could take these into Google Ads or potentially even in the future, maybe like Google Optimize, to do all sorts of personalization and other components. Now, as I mentioned, analysis is going to be a key area of what we use. And another area to just show you is pathing. So again, Google Analytics, if you've ever tried to do pathing in it, you've realized that you just can't do pathing really in Google Analytics in either the free or the paid version. So luckily in GA4, they've completely rebuilt pathing. So in here, we can now do event as well as page pathing. Additionally, we can bring in audiences. We can break this down by devices. It's very interactive. But one of the examples I love to show is, let's say you wanted to do some pathing off of a conversion. So everyone normally wants to understand, how do users convert? What are the most common paths that lead to conversions? So what's nice about GA4 is they've actually built forwards and backwards pathing as a native feature. So if we want to understand how users convert, we can just say, I want to select an ending point. And in here, you can pick any page or any event you're tracking. So it's on the fly. So as an example, I could pick my emoji event, or I can pick scroll. Or in this example, I'll just pick a user that downloaded something on my site. If I want to understand how and what users did before they downloaded something, I can now just start interacting with this and just work backwards. And again, I can do that either at an event or at any sort of page level I want, with all the segmentation and all the other features kind of built in. So this shows kind of two areas of things many of us have been asking for over 10 years in Google Analytics that GA4 is now addressing. And in addition, giving away functionality, which was previously only in the 360 version. Next, I want to show you a little bit about conversions. I feel like this is one of the most exciting areas of improvements in the product. Google has completely rebuilt conversion tracking. If you've used Google Analytics before, you're probably painfully aware that goals or conversions in the existing version of GA have a number of challenges and limitations. Specifically, goals today, you only get 20 of them. You can't reuse them. You can't delete them. They're all session scoped, and they have all these weird restrictions. So it doesn't support all sorts of use cases that we really need as our business changes or grows. GA4 has completely rebuilt conversion tracking. So first of all, now by default, you get 30 conversions instead of 20. And additionally, they're more flexible. So you can actually archive a conversion, and that frees up a new slot. So now we can support seasonal goals or seasonal conversions or campaign-based conversions, because we can archive and reuse our conversions when we need. Additionally, we can create conversions that were never possible in Google Analytics before. Previously, if you created a conversion, you could only define it off of an event or a page. You couldn't really do anything more complex, like say, I want to create a conversion for maybe someone in a certain city or someone on a certain device, or even something simple as someone that purchased maybe $50 or more product. You could only have it off the purchase, not what was in the purchase itself. Now in GA4, one of the things in here is we have a new audience builder. And in our audience builder, I'll show you an example of an audience I built. So in this audience, I said, I want to look at anyone on my website that first viewed my blog, and then within 10 minutes, they viewed my contact page. So this is another example of time-based analysis or use that we just can't do in Google Analytics. You can't scope things by time. So now we can do that. In addition, there's a new feature called audience triggers. And what this does is this will actually create an event anytime a user enters an audience that I've created. And what's interesting to kind of pause and think about here is, unfortunately, now I'm going to start using buzzwords, but almost on every marketing or demo or call like this you ever attend, everyone talks about why they're a CDP or a customer data platform. And now I get to talk about why GA4 is sort of like a CDP. It has a lot of CDP-like functionality. Because here, what we're doing is we're having conditions like when a user enters an audience, we can create events, and then we can do things with those events. And to get even further, all of this stuff shows up in BigQuery in real time. So then I can actually use that in my broader marketing stack. And I could even show you in a little bit, there's even identity and other components that go into this as well. So for this, the important part is I have this kind of complex audience of conditions that weren't possible before. And when a user enters this audience, I can have it create an event. And what that does is now if I switch over to my events report, it creates an event that I can mark as a conversion. So now anything you can create as an audience, you can create as a conversion in GA4. So if you're e-commerce and you want someone that purchased more than $50 of product for the first time, that can be a conversion. If you're B2B and you have a form and you want a conversion when it's a certain vertical or a certain job title that fills out the form, you can now mix your dimensions and your metrics and all that sort of stuff to create all of this advanced conversion logic, which simply wasn't possible before. So that's really exciting. That's where we get in here. And related to that, I feel like this is a good time to talk about BigQuery. So previously in the free version of Google Analytics, it was impossible to get data out of Google Analytics in any way that really made sense. You could only get reports out. You couldn't get all of the data out of the product. And that was one of the biggest reasons people upgraded to GA360, because it included a free BigQuery integration, which allowed you to either use Google Cloud as your data warehouse or bring data into BigQuery, into AWS, or any other kind of data environment. So for the first time now, Google Analytics for everyone includes a free BigQuery integration. And what's interesting about this is actually it's been substantially improved. So first of all, you get your daily tables, and then they've also increased the streaming capabilities. So previously, even in the enterprise version, the paid version of Google Analytics, the fastest you could get data into your data warehouse was every 10 to 15 minutes. Now with the new streaming capabilities, you can have raw data in your BigQuery environment within seconds of when Google Analytics receives it. And related to that, there's also a number of improvements that happen on this side as well because of the changes that Google's made to their data model. So I'll just pop over to BigQuery for just 1 second, and I can show you my BigQuery tables over here. And what's interesting just to point out about this is that the new data model is an event approach. Previously, everything was sessionized in Google Analytics. And it was actually very difficult even for enterprise customers to work with their BigQuery or their raw data because everything was highly nested and kind of complex within the session type approach. GA4 simply adopts an event-driven approach. So everything is just way easier to work. So BigQuery is a huge change because for anyone that considers themselves an intermediate or advanced user of Google Analytics or just an intermediate or advanced analyst, at a certain point, you always need access to your raw event level data. And BigQuery opens this up. So you can integrate this with your own CRM. You can build your own predictives. You have all of the things you need in here, like client and user IDs, all the device information, and of course, everything related to your events. And all of that now is available in raw format. regardless if you're a free or paid customer. So that's another, for me, huge improvement for GA4. Now with that, really, there's all sorts of other things that are baked in this product. So I'll just give you a few more examples, and then we can kind of really just switch over to our Q&A section. GA4, for me, also solves a lot of things that drove me crazy about Google Analytics. So first of all, if you're a basic user of Google Analytics, or even a new user, one of the things you always do is you probably use your content reports. And everyone has the same question, where they want to understand how content leads to outcomes or conversions. And if you take a look at the current version of Google Analytics, notice that on the content reports, there's no concept of conversions, because the legacy data model that's kind of session and hit based doesn't support mixing a page with session scoped metrics like goals and conversions. They just don't go together. In addition, one of the things, I've been training people how to use Google Analytics for 10 years, and I think I've said this over 1,000 times. Google Analytics uses the last non-direct attribution module, and that's what all of the reports in Google Analytics are based on, this kind of last click or last touch based approach. And you can't change it. So if you want to do any sort of other attribution, the only place you can do that is in the conversion in your multi-channel funnels component. Now, GA4 has some pretty, I think, awesome improvements. So first, if I go into the new content reports in GA4, I'm just going to head over to my pages report. For the first time, we can actually see we have new things in here, like conversions. So it's fixing a lot of the scopes and dimensions and metrics that didn't go together. Additionally, if you want to get like a preview of the potential power and flexibility of this, if I click my Customize button in the top right-hand corner, for the first time ever, we can actually change the default attribution model for all of the reports in Google Analytics. Now, right now, it's not really exciting because the only options are changing it to different last touch. But that's because the actual core attribution components haven't yet launched in GA4. So hopefully that comes sometime soon. But just imagine the potential of being able to bring in data-driven, linear, or even your own custom approaches, and just be able to change the default attribution when you need. For me, I feel like customers have been asking for that for a very long time. So now that's possible. Additionally, another one of my favorite improvements to show is, for me, for most of the kind of average users of Google Analytics, probably no one enjoys debugging. It's not necessarily the most fun exercise in Google Analytics, because previously the only way we would do debugging is you usually pull up your network console, you start looking at all your hits, keeping track of that. But Google's made improvements there for the average user as well. So as an example, I have the Google Analytics Debugger extension. I simply turned it on. And now, as I navigate my site, just by having this extension on, what's going to end up happening, assuming my live demo works, is if I switch back over to Google Analytics, there's a new Debug View report. And now, in real time, because of that extension, it'll actually stream all of my test data directly into my property. And I can click on any of this data and see all the dimensions and metrics, like is CMO visiting my website? What are all the attributes that are related to each of these events, and everything related to that. So this is just kind of giving you a preview. Pretty much every area of the product of Google Analytics is being improved. And where I would kind of end for now is just to make sure I'm setting the right expectations. So back in my intro, I shared that it's very important to not approach GA4 as a replacement for Google Analytics or Universal Analytics quite yet. It's still not ready to do that. The best recommendation is you still want to use both versions of Google Analytics, because GA4 has all of these exciting improvements, and eventually it's going to get a lot of the missing features. So right now, GA4 doesn't have a lot of the Google integrations. It doesn't have an optimized integration. It doesn't have Search Console. Some of the things we expect that would be pretty basic are still missing. Like, it's still pretty challenging to do basic content reporting. We don't have multi-channel funnels or some of our attribution components. All that stuff is going to come and it's going to get better. But the important part is that GA4, because it's so different, it's not going to carry forward any of your data that you have today in Google Analytics for your web implementations. So because of that, what you need to do is you need to actually like go into Google Tag Manager or use the new G tag, and you need to work with the new GA4 tags. So my recommendation is if you're not using GA4 today and you like anything that I showed, just hop over to your favorite tag management system, like Google Tag Manager, and you can just get started with this in like 15 to 30 minutes. You just go in, you're going to create a new GA4 tag. So all the tags are already there. You'll create your new property in Google Analytics, and you can have them both running side by side. So I have my 360 or my regular universal. I have my GA4 ones. They don't conflict with each other. And then all you have to do is just set one tag to fire all of the page views all over your site. So again, it takes 10 to 15 minutes of work. You can get some data into GA4. And because of that, already you'll be able to go in and start playing with the new funnels, the new features, the new capabilities, and just begin getting hopefully excited and get started with the core of the product. So that is my quick demo of GA4. So now I'm happy to switch over to questions. So let me pull up the chat. But while I do that, Tim or anyone have a question to start?
There's a great list of questions coming in, but
Yes.
mine's like eighth on the. I'm not going to jump in and jump the line.
Is it in the chat or is it in the Q&A section?
It's in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go through
And
this.
the first question I think was the Mary Hoy's how does GA4 handle sampling, and are any differences are the same as Universal Analytics unless you have the paid version.
Yep, I got that. Okay, great question. So let's start there.
And I would say if you go from that down, it's just a series of very good questions.
Perfect. So we'll start with that one. Sampling works very differently in GA4. The way it works right now is all of the core reports are unsampled in the left-hand nav. So if you're familiar with GA today, it's a similar approach where all the reports are unsampled. However, in GA today, anytime you come in and you add a dimension or use an audience or really do anything to those reports, if you have like more than 500,000 visits in the date range you're at, it'll be sampled. GA4 right now, all of the reports in the left-hand nav are unsampled no matter what you do to them. So you can use the new comparison feature, you can add secondary dimensions, and right now they'll never be sampled. However, there is this new area of GA4 called analysis, which I was showing you. And this is where you will and could run into sampling, but even then it works differently. So in analysis, when you're building your own freeform reports or you're building these funnels, now it'll sample if you're using, I think, more than 10 million events in your date range, where previously, again, it was 500,000 kind of visits. So it's different. So sampling is still in GA4, but it's only here. But it's also worth noting, previously in the free version of Google Analytics, when you ran into sampling, the only options you had was to either reduce your date range to try and make sampling go away, or to upgrade to the paid version. That was one of the reasons BigQuery was so important, because there was no way in the free version of GA to get your raw data to work around sampling. But remember, in GA4, you have a free BigQuery integration. And right now, for my knowledge, there are no limits and there is no restrictions. So even if you were to run into sampling in here, you still have your raw data now as a proper workaround and another route to work around that. So that is available. So the next question, is a GA4 audience a universal segment or a UA audience that can be linked to other products such as Salesforce Marketing Cloud? So right now, in the new audiences in GA4, the only integrations that are available is with Google Ads. Everything else that you would expect to have in Universal is not yet available and is likely components Google's working on. So for things like Salesforce, I would expect to hear and see support like that later. It's important to note, like, the enterprise version for GA4 hasn't even launched yet. And this just goes to my earlier version of GA4 isn't ready to replace universal. So things like that will hopefully be coming soon. Andy, you asked, in the funnel, what was the time aspect tracking when you turned it on? So in GA, let's talk about GA4 time in general. If I go to the content reports in GA4, there's a new concept of time. And the time is built off of engagement. So previously in Google Analytics, I don't know if anyone else has ever seen this, but if you ever go into your content reports in Google Analytics today, and you really look at time and you think about it, it likely doesn't make any sense. So as an example, this is the time for my website. And it's telling me that on average, people spend 2 minutes on my homepage, and they spend 8 minutes reading this blog post. I can promise you that no one is spending 2 minutes on my homepage. Like, no one is actually physically interacting with my homepage for 2 minutes. It's impossible. And that's because GA previously measured time between page views, or really between event interactions. And that was just a calculation. And again, I could show you the formula. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. GA4, if now you look at time, is very different. And it's actually a lot smaller, and it's a lot more believable. And that's because GA is now only measuring, in the new version, engagement time. And it actually keeps track of when the page is in the foreground and when the page is being interacted with. Where previously, if you came to my homepage, you went to lunch, and you came back 10 minutes later and did something, it would record 10 minutes of time. Now it's actually going to look for how much was the page being scrolled or hovered or clicked on or interacted with. So time is way more meaningful. And then to your question about the funnel, it's simply going to be calculating the difference between when the various events that you defined occurred. And since it's keeping track in a meaningful way, and it's also able to calculate those deltas, the time is actually the more believable time of what's happening. Doug, you asked, if you don't pay for 360, I'm guessing there's going to be a cost for BigQuery, much like Firebase. So right now, it's important to note that you can turn on BigQuery. There's no cost to do the integration itself. Like, it's not going to charge you a set amount to enable the integration. Within BigQuery, there is potential cost. However, you can use the BigQuery sandbox to start. And the BigQuery sandbox doesn't require a credit card, but it does have limits of what you can do within the sandbox. If you wanted to use BigQuery the proper way, you can just look at the BigQuery pricing. And I just like to summarize, BigQuery is a product that was built to store massive amounts of data sets. And we're talking like petabytes of data. The amount of data you're going to generate from Google Analytics is going to be so small compared to what it's built to handle. So as an example, you actually get terabytes of data, or I think for free, even in the free tier. And then it charges you like $5 per terabyte of what you query. And for most of you, especially if you're only using the free version of GA today, you're not even going to come close to hitting these. So at most, we're talking like cost of maybe somewhere between $10 to $50 a month. And only then if I would consider you a really advanced user. So even usually on the GCP side, the cost is pretty small. Let's see. You've heard the general recommendation is to have pretty detailed events. Has that been my experience? I don't know if I have a great answer to that. Within GA, I'm still advising most people to just get started, not necessarily to go move all of their events over or to do very complex implementations. So from an event perspective, what's changed is previously in Google Analytics, when we looked at events, everything was category, actions, and labels. So it also makes no sense because you think of everything in this hierarchy. And the only reason we think about category, action, label is because Google told you it should be category, action, label. If you think about a data layer for any tag management system, no one implements a data layer with category, action, label. All tag management systems usually do an event name and then key value parameters. So if you were to track a video, you'd have video as the event name, and then you'd have video title, video author, video category, the video action, the buffer rate, not category, action, label. So GA4, just forget everything you knew about events. And now just think of events in a new way and a better way that makes sense. Because simply, we have events. We have these event names. So I might have an event name like scroll. And then instead of action and label or even category, we simply have parameters. So you can have a scroll percentage or a percent scrolled, a page title, a page refer, or all those video attributes. So when you set up events, ideally you want to think of the name you want the event, and then what parameters you want to associate with that. But you can change that over time. The biggest difference, and this is kind of something I hope gets improved in the future, is by default, a lot of your parameters for the event don't show up in the UI by default. They actually only show up in BigQuery. In order for the parameters to show up in the UI, you have to remember to come in and actually set up the custom dimensions. Or another way to phrase it, you have to register the event parameter for it to actually register and show up in the UI. So I think that's what you might be thinking about, is you have to register your event parameters now. And again, I expect Google will make that easier for us in the future. Doug, you're asking, why would we upgrade to 360 if now we have features like this for free in GA4? So that's a good question. The enterprise model of GA4 is still being built. So I would expect you'll hear more on all of that soon, as we all will. But right now, for most customers, GA4, again, is simply not ready to replace Universal. For 10 things I showed you, it does better. There's also 10 things that we're still waiting for to come to the product. So all that's going to get addressed soon. And then GA4 will have a different enterprise model. So maybe some of the things like the sampling or some of the event restrictions, things will just work differently. But again, Google's working on all that. And I don't have any of those details for sure. Let's see. Is the debug view everyone who is running the plugin, or does it tie to just you? So Tim, great question. This is one of my favorite things to show. Google actually just launched new demo accounts for GA4. So if you'd like to play with GA4 without implementing it, you can just Google GA4 demo account and you can get free access. And if you hop over to the debug view in the demo account, you can see there's 102 people right now debugging the demo account. So it is everyone that is using the Google Analytics debugger, not just you. Katie, you asked, do we recommend keeping GA4 and GA in the same workspace in GTM? I would, unless you have a lot of stuff going on in GTM. As an example, this is my GTM account for our website. I have my GA4 events, including all my weird emojis. And then I also have my classic universal. So for most customers or users, it's going to be best to do everything in the same container. And that's because at the end of the day, you can reuse a lot of what you have. If you already have a GA inside a tag management system like Telium or Google Tag Manager, most of the work for GA4 is going to be in your tag manager, not necessarily going in and changing any of the code on your site itself. So by keeping it in the same place, it just allows you to easily reuse all your event logic and triggers and rules from your existing Google Analytics implementation. Then you ask for the Analysis Hub. Once you create a report for one property, can you save and share that with another property? So not right now. I hope that comes soon. Right now, everything you do inside the new analysis inside GA4 is saved just for the property that you're in. So that's not available yet. Max, you asked about how does GA4 work with the native mobile app? GA4 works great with mobile. In fact, GA4 conceptually is the same as Firebase Analytics or Google Analytics for Firebase. If you're already using Google Analytics for Firebase today, you can actually go into Firebase and upgrade to GA4, and it'll carry forward all of your data for your mobile apps. And that's because Firebase is the same identical data model as GA4 is. And that's why for apps, it brings your data forward, but for web, it doesn't. So if you're doing anything with apps today, GA4 is a huge upgrade. because you can get access to all this new features and functionality with all the data you already collected in Firebase. And I'm going to be fairly honest, like the UI of Firebase has never been that great for advanced analytics. So GA4 is a huge improvement in that area. Also, there's a demo project as well, so you can try that. I agree, Max. Time on site was terrible in GA4. Survey data. Do you have any insight on how the average engagement time will work on continuous scroll sites? Does a metric reset when each new article comes into the view? So if you have a concept of an SPA or like a single page app, GA4 has kind of some native support for that. So if I switch back over to my account, what I should be able to do here is I just want to show you, like they've rebuilt some of the base tagging. And even in the base tag, it has support now for browser-based history and other advanced settings. So the simple answer to your question is, as long as you break the page view, and you can do that either natively potentially or customly in your tag management system, it should break it out the way you want. Another question, the connectivity with the rest of GMP won't be out of the box. We don't know yet. The only connector right now available is Google Ads, as well as BigQuery and Firebase. But DV360, Campaign Manager, and all the other products are on the roadmap. So we'll find more about that later. Lucas, you asked about the identity stitching. So I think this is another really important improvement. GA never really handled identity that well. Previously in Google Analytics, you could only look at anonymous users, or separately in a completely different place, you could look at logged in users if you tracked users that were logged in with user IDs. GA4 has a new identity approach. So if you go into your properties and you go into the default reporting identity, now for the first time, it has a combined identity. And what I mean by that is, first and foremost, if you send your own user IDs, so if someone logs in and you know who they are and you tell Google this is user 1234, it'll always use that first and foremost. Then if it's not available, there's a new concept called Google Signals. If you have users who have opted in to sharing data with Google, and then you also opt in to Google Signals in your property, you can use Google's cross-device identity graph to power all of the core reports for those consented users. Previously, that was only available in like one report in Google Analytics. Now you can actually use Google's identity graph, potentially for free, in all of your reports. So first it uses your IDs. Then if those aren't available, it tries to use Google's identity graph. And lastly, if that's not available, or you choose not to opt into that, it'll use the anonymous first-party cookies, just like it always did. And additionally, you can change the identity space. Previously, a lot of the things you changed in Google Analytics were very destructive, and they were permanent. Meaning, if you change something, it would only apply point in time forward, and the changes you made were forever. You can actually change the default reporting identity as many times as you want, and it's flexible and retroactive. So that's another improvement where it's being more flexible instead of destructive like the way it was. Let's see. They're not using Firebase or Mixpanel. So if you want to use GA4 on apps, you would need to use Firebase. Potentially, you could use the new measurement protocol, which just launched as an alpha. But by far, if you want to track mobile apps with GA4, it's going to be with Firebase. We built Tableau report using BigQuery, but had to manually refresh the report. Do you know why it cannot be refreshed? That sounds like an issue land on the Tableau side. Tableau has that native BigQuery connector, and the data in GA4 can refresh BigQuery or even existing universal analytics. So that feels like a Tableau setting. Does GA4 have cross-domain tracking? So Christina, on that side, all that just launched. So if you go into your stream settings in GA4, there's new cross-domain right here. In fact, previously you had to do a bunch of setup in Google Tag Manager or with the tags in order to do cross-domain. Now, potentially, you can do all the cross-domain settings directly in the UI. So you would just come in here, You can add the domains you want to link together, and you can even regex match them, which we couldn't before. And it's all done in the UI. And additionally, in the last 2 weeks, they just launched the new referral exclusion lists. And this is another area where we, for the first time ever, have regex support. So a lot of improvements there as well. And then I think the last question is, Katie, you asked, what if we're pushing conversions from UA and GA4 to Google Ads? Is ads smart enough to not double count conversions? So actually, I think the documentation for Google Ad conversion export for GA4 was just added. So that feature should be coming soon, meaning you can export your conversions. The way it's going to work is everything you export will potentially be duplicated. So as an example, in Google Analytics today, you can share an audience with Google Ads. But the way you do that is you actually do it one audience at a time. You can only create an audience and share it individually with Google Ads. So if I create a new audience, by default, it's not available in Ads. They've rebuilt the audience integration with Google Ads. So if you link Google Ads, by default, if I actually go over to Google Ads, every audience you create will automatically be available in Google Ads, unless you do the inverse. You say that I don't want that audience in Google Ads. So it'll be way more intuitive. However, both audiences will be there. So that actually opens up some interesting possibilities, because in Google Ads, you can now potentially build combined audiences off of both spaces, or you long-term are probably going to want to just unlink universal and just use the new GA4 audiences when you're ready to. And the same thing for conversions. Once you're ready to use the new conversions for GA4 in Google Ads, it'll probably make most sense to unlink your universal linking at the point you're ready. And then Mark.
Charles, that's really a good point as why you want them kind of existing together for a while, so you can start to build up some history in GA4, right? So that the audiences start to build up and things like that too, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. And then Mark, I think you slipped in a question. Default channel groupings do exist in GA4. However, they're not customizable yet. So that's another feature we're waiting for, is our own ability to do channel groupings. And I'm hoping that, and I'm pretty sure it's going to end up this way. Today in Google Analytics, if you talk about channel groupings, there's 10 different ways to do channel groupings, and they're each separate. There's custom channel groupings. There's channel groupings at the property. There's channel groupings in multi-channel funnels. In fact, if you use the new attribution feature, there's a different channel grouping. So hopefully Google in GA4 will have one channel grouping that can just be used everywhere. Wouldn't that be nice? So I'm hoping once we get that new feature, that'll improve that silly feature as well.
Awesome. Well, Charles, let's stop there. We're right at almost at 8 o'clock here. And we have stuff to give away. And then certainly if folks want to stay around when we do the room breakouts, you can just stay in the main room, and Charles will hang around and answer some more questions as well.